Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you. Write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast. Today, we are honored to be joined by a very special guest. You may know him from his various publications, such as Vigilance, Blood, Sweat, and Fears, and the Lincoln Bright stories. Or, for our fellow 90s kids, you'll definitely remember him as Zordon from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Welcome to the podcast, David J. Fielding. David, how are we doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, honestly, I was telling people pretty much all the past 2 weeks that the inner 90s kid was kind of screaming quite a bit when we were able to connect. So it's awesome to get to speak with you, David, and we really do appreciate the time. And
Not a problem.
Yeah. So, starting off, we've talked a little bit about this, that, we like to dig into, not necessarily to your social security card, but we want to go into your past a little bit and
Sure.
talk about some of your origin story. But one thing I wanted to just bring up really quick, because my family was a military family. I was a military brat, and didn't really have a permanent residence for quite a long time. And I understand that your family was in the armed forces too.
Yeah, that's correct. My dad was in the Air Force. So my life up until about the age of 16, 17 was moving all around the country. My mother was from England, so we lived over there for a while. But we lived or have traveled through each of the 48 contiguous United States all over. My grandparents lived in Indiana. That's where my father was born. And we would go and visit them every summer. But, we lived in Michigan, we lived in Colorado, we lived in Washington State. And then when my father retired, he settled in a small town called Paris, Texas, which is where I finished high school.
Cool.
But yeah, we were all over the place. Yeah.
When it comes to acting, both in person and voice acting, I feel like they're kind of different paths to go on. So we're just kind of wondering, but even before maybe you got into acting and even writing, did you ever have a dream job growing up, or something that you kind of saw yourself doing when you were out of school?
Well, I had the idea from a very early age that I wanted to be in the movies, simply because to me, the movies were like a great form of escape. I used to watch the Saturday afternoon science fiction theater that would be on television, or the Saturday or Sunday evening movies, or whatever it was. And I was always very drawn towards these very sort of fantasy oriented or science fiction oriented stories. And, I watched films like, Green Slime, and, I'd watch all the classical movies from, King Kong all the way through up, through modern werewolf stories and stuff like that. So I always had this idea that I wanted to go to the movies so I could be in a movie like that I could put on some weird makeup and, scare people or something like that. But, and I would make my poor parents the carport while I acted out scenes from the comic books that I was reading and stuff. So I had this sort of dramatic bent when I was a kid, even though I was also at the same time very timid. I was very shy. And the outside world kind of held a sort of it was just like a generalized fear that, if you were off by yourself, bad things could happen, and something like that. So I always had this kind of timid side to myself as well. And yet when, by the time I reached high school and started to do theater, I picked a profession that was, you can't be afraid. You can't be timid if you're going to do something like that. So I had to sort of reconcile those two sides of myself, as far as being brave enough to put myself out there so that people could believe the characters that I were playing on stage. And in a way, I think it kind of helped me because my father was in the Air Force, because we moved around a lot. I had the opportunity to meet a wide range of different types of people, and the communities that we lived in, I think were kind of more diverse than the one that we settled into when we moved back to Texas. Because I always had friends or acquaintances who were people of color or from a different area of the world. But when we settled here in Texas, it was really kind of a culture shock, and it was very clear that things were much more divided here, and that was an adjustment to make. But I think that kind of experience about moving around a lot and being around different people allowed me to have a greater sense of empathy of sorts, so that that was part of my toolbox that I could dip into whenever I was creating a character on the stage and stuff like that.
That's really cool. I really like hearing that, because I'm not just trying to mirror my own experiences here, but it's becoming very palpable for me to remember some of those same experiences I had, because each military base you go to is, it's same but different, if if that makes sense. You've got your post exchange and some of the things that you're used to seeing. But yeah, they're definitely a melting pot. And so when you do get out of that life, there's some shock to it. But
I went through Army basic training because I was in the National Guard for a while. And again, it was one of those experiences that really kind of teaches you, you need to get along with whoever it is that's there, because you're going to have to count on that person to help you or whatever. And I really do think that a great number of people kind of miss out on that when they're growing up, if they live in a kind of static community. And I taught high school for a very brief 6 months. And it was very depressing to me to ask kids where they wanted to travel to or what places would they like to visit, and have 90% of them say, "Oh, I don't want to go anywhere. I'm afraid of moving over there. I'm not sure those people would like me, or I'm not sure I would like them." And I was like, "Oh man, you're kind of cheating yourself out of a great experience of being able to experience, how other people's live their lives and what your similarities are going to be with those people." So I found that just a tiny bit depressing.
Yeah, no, I'm as a teacher teaching high school myself, I definitely experienced that with my students too, where I try to tell them like, hey, you know what, Stevens Point is nice, it's great, but Wisconsin's big, the United States is huge, this hemisphere is enormous, and the world's infinite. Like, there's so much out there, you can't be stuck here your whole life. And if you love being here, that's great, but be open to like trying new things, meeting new people, and working with them. It's what you absolutely need.
yeah,
So, more on your childhood. You grew up in the '70s, and you touched on how science fiction was a big part of your life. I've
Huge.
noticed you're also a really big horror fan, and I think The
Well,
Omen was a childhood favorite, right?
it's interesting that you bring that up, because when I was growing up and I read voraciously as a kid, I was always kind of ticking off my teachers, because I think they were called SRAs. We had these SRA reading things in school where it would give you like a color coded page that would have all this text, and you read a story and then you would answer questions on the back or whatever. And I was always like 5, 6, 8 pages ahead of everybody else in the class, because I was just reading them so fast and drinking them in. But all of the stuff that I was reading when I was growing up was it was mainly fantasy based stuff. I really got into like J.R. Tolkien and Edgar Rice Burroughs and other stories that were of a fantasy bent. And in the late '70s, I again was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, and
Ah,
telling these stories or experience in game where you had these characters who were, fighting, they represented the light, and they were fighting against forces of darkness.
mhm,
And I read a lot of fantasy because for me, fantasy was all about hope. that good triumphs over the evil, that you have to have hope in the world. And then I want to say about 15 years ago, I really kind of lost my taste for it. I kind of started to really question why I had read so many of these fantasy stories, but didn't see any of that stuff kind of coming true in real life. That these fantasy stories that we tell one another, these mythic stories that I was a big fan of Greek and Roman myth when I was growing up, and read a lot of those stories. And we would have these stories that we tell each other over and over have the same lesson. Don't be a bully, stand up for your friends, do the right thing, even if it costs something. You have to fight against the darkness in the world. And yet, the older I got, the more it seemed like the darkness was pushing in, and the light really wasn't winning. So as a writer, I started to stop writing fantasy-oriented stuff. I stopped reading fantasy-oriented stuff, and I stopped watching a lot of fantasy-oriented movies because they weren't lying, but at the same time, they didn't seem to be true. And it was just sort of like a distraction. It was kind of a bread and circuses kind of thing, where it's like, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Here's a wonderful movie about a dragon. Watch this. And so I kind of soured on it. And I stopped playing tabletop role-playing games. And when I started to really delve into writing short stories and trying to get published, what I found myself being drawn to were these stories that were of a darker bent, that had a little bit of a supernatural element to them, because that was my way of trying to control the darkness, to give darkness a face that I could recognize and push back against. And rather than write about unicorns or whatever, I found myself, trying to process or to therapize myself with these stories of, you mentioned that I was a fan of horror, and I'm not a fan of horror at all.
Oh.
I hate jump scares. I hate slasher films. I cannot sit through some of those movies because I don't see harming human bodies as entertainment, which is very strange. That I've written a number of stories, and I'm still writing stories about these supernatural entities that are trying to harm people and stuff. But I wouldn't call myself a fan of horror, because, like I said, I mean, there's still that timid part of me that is afraid of things, and I jump at shadows and kind of thing. But I also think it serves me in a way, because it allows me to sort of, like, in those moments when all the lights are on or there's sunlight streaming in, I can look at those things and go, what makes this tick? What why is this thing doing this, or what is the reasoning behind it? And but yeah, I think that's where all that comes from.
Yeah, it's a very, very Dark Knight-esque approach you've taken there. I just think of you've got Bruce Wayne sharpening up his first batarang, and Alfred asked him why bats. It's because that's what he's afraid of, and now his enemies will share his dread. And that's kind of what you're doing here. Is you're taking this idea of something that frightens you and almost compartmentalizing it to deal with it, and making it so you can work through it.
Yeah, I think especially with the Lincoln Bright books, I mean, I've always had this idea that everything ripples. Every choice has a consequence, and those consequences, they ripple outwards. It's not just if you perform an action, it's not just the point where you do it that gets harmed. That goes outwards. It touches other people, and I think that's like the main theme that goes through the Lincoln Bright books is that the whole idea behind the glims is that the stuff that people couldn't deal with is what sticks behind and what continues to harm the area that they inhabited or the people that they met. And we how many times have we read in the news that generational trauma exists, that the sins of the father are passed on to the sins of the son, and so things ripple and things bounce back, and not to get political or too depressing or whatever, but what's happening on the other side of the world right now is a result of something that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, it's still rippling outwards, and I think that's one of the lessons it's very hard for human beings to learn, is because we don't live long enough to really learn all the stuff that we need to learn in order to be the better part of ourselves, unless you're really, really lucky or really, really aware of who you are. We just seem to keep making the same sort of stumbles here and there all over the place. And how do we solve that problem? I don't know.
I was going to say, David, you mentioned something that kind of stuck with me for a moment there, that when you look to some of the earlier sci-fi, some of the earlier fantasy, especially like superhero properties and comics, they definitely had that sense of right and wrong pretty clearly defined, right? You didn't have to worry about anti-heroes and trying to guess who was going to most likely be standing at the end of the day. But I've kind of felt that about sci-fi and fantasy in the same way that you mentioned, that the further we kind of get away from that age, the more that I also kind of check out of it. And so I definitely understand what you mean by that, because I mean, I look to Star Trek in particular, right? Star Trek kind of taught us, let's talk through our differences as opposed to, pew 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 and let's put holes in things kind of thing. Yeah. So, but I guess to the point of kind of looking at sci-fi, looking at superheroes for a moment, it does actually kind of bring us to our first fan question of the night. And Joe, definitely take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our fans want to know if you had a favorite superhero property, and they've noticed that also you've referenced Moon Knight quite a bit. Any comic properties you've really enjoyed outside of superheroes?
My favorite superhero is Captain America, and not because of his association with the United States, but basically what Steve Rogers stands for. Steve Rogers stands for we're going to do what's right. And so Cap has always been my favorite hero. Also because he's a man out of time, and at points in my life, I've felt like I'm out of time. I'm out of step with what's popular or what's going on in the world. And the aesthetic of things that I like are from a different era. I like very vintage stuff. I wish all of us still wore three-piece suits to work, and took a little bit more pride in how we present ourselves to the world. But at the same time, we live in a world that's like, hey, it's all about comfort and convenience. And I have so many t-shirts, it's not even funny. The stuff that I really sort of look at and admire is from a different time. So, I mean, I identify that aspect of Steve, but it's really sort of like the whole idea of standing up for what's right, no matter where you fall on the spectrum. We're going to do this, for everybody, not just for a few. So that's my favorite superhero property. I do enjoy Moon Knight though, but for a different reason than I think most people might think of. Because while Moon Knight is a very cool character with his dissociative disorder and stuff like that, the sort of like, is this real? Is this happening? Kind of thing. But Moon Knight's first appearance showed up in one of my favorite comics as a kid. His first appearance was in Werewolf by Night, and from about the age of 7 or so, I wanted to be a werewolf so badly that we lived in Colorado, and whenever the moon would come up, it was just huge, and wolves were very cool, and I was a werewolf for Halloween. I don't know how many years, and the comic book of Werewolf by Night, where there was this, and when I look at it as an adult, I'm thinking, oh wow, what does that say about my psyche? About it's really kind of like the Hulk or the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of thing. It's like they're two sides of your personality. There's the the Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and then there's Jack Russell and the werewolf, and but I just really wanted to be this wild creature that would run through the woods and howl. And when Moon Knight showed up in his all white costume and he's throwing these little moon discs at the werewolf, I was like, this is freaking awesome. So that's where my love of Moon Knight comes from, and also because Oscar Isaac is just brilliant. He's just, so.
Yeah, no, and I think so a similar appreciation I have for Captain America, always kind of like with you, where it's more about what he stands for and the way he carries himself than what he believes. And it always makes me think of a quote from the Civil War comic book where uh, things are just starting to divide, the heroes are starting to separate, and he says, "When the whole mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move." And that
Yeah,
is just something that just radiates awesomeness with Captain America.
yeah, and I was a little kind of ticked off that they gave that line to Sharon in the movies, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
it made sense in context of the thing. But
Mhm.
what's really interesting about that line is that anybody from wherever you land on the political spectrum, somebody can take that line and goes, "Oh, that's for me."
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so it is very cool. It's also very problematic at the same
Yes.
time.
Agreed. Okay, so kind of shifting back towards you becoming who you are. When it came to acting, like you said there's something you knew you wanted to do from a very young age. But when you land in Texas and you get to college, you get to the University of Texas, uh, acting is now at the forefront, definitely, like it was before. So, is there anything during your time at the University of Texas, any courses or productions or professors that really stand out that like helped you get to where you are now?
I wish I remembered what courses I took at the University of Texas other than theater. I know I did. I know I took a bunch of courses because I graduated.
Mhm.
I know I did, I took English and science and all the things that I needed to fulfill the GPA average or whatever.
Mhm.
But my memory of my time at what was Southwest Texas State University, but is now just Texas University now, um, was I spent 20 out of every 24 hours at the theater building, either goofing off or working on a show or taking a class,
Mhm.
and just um, really sort of stretching my ability to perform. And I was blessed to work with a wonderful director by the name of Jay Jennings, who this is very selfish of me to say, he put on some of the best productions I ever took part in, simply because Jay had uh, this epic vision of all of
Mhm.
the shows that we did. When we did Romeo and Juliet, he had the entire stage molded out of pour foam and created a bridge, and um, I was lucky enough to star in 3 of Jay's productions, and all of them were just huge. They were these massive undertakings that, sadly, at the time, only ran for like 6 or 8 performances. They were, we rehearsed them for 2 or 3 months, and then
Mhm.
they were over in a week. And yeah, I'm sure there are visual records, there are photographs or whatever, but I started in Jay's Romeo and Juliet. I played the role of the devil in Cloud of Witnesses, which was about uh, the battle for the Alamo. And then I got to play Antonio Salieri in Amadeus. So uh, those 3 productions had a real big impact on, or at least for me, what the power of theater
Mhm.
was all about. It was larger than life. It was a way to sort of sweep the audience off its feet and take it just to a different
Mhm.
place in time. And Sheila Hargett, who was the costume designer there, costumed all 3 of those shows, and I wore some of the best awesome stuff that I had in all of my theater
Mhm.
training. Uh, so I had an amazing time at Southwest, and the main reason I did theater, when I was got in high school, is because that's, for me, because we had moved to Texas, and if you don't play football in Texas, then you're not a guy. And of course, I'm only like 5'7", and so I didn't really measure up to what was supposed to be a football star in Texas. And so in my senior year, I didn't play football my senior year, but I was also the only guy in the theater class, and that's how I got to meet all the girls, and that's what carried me, towards Southwest Texas State. It was not only a chance to improve the skill set, but it was a chance to meet other girls and find out more about what that was all about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a education major, I know exactly what that is. I was usually the only guy in all of my classes. So yeah, totally get it. And I don't know if it's necessarily like selfish to say that that's something you enjoyed, because like you said, the director and the costume designer and the world that they designed and the world that they made like sucked the audience in. And clearly, I mean, you have to do that to your actors too. Because if
Yeah.
you're not invested in it, you don't believe it, then no one else is going to believe it. So the
Yep.
fact that you were enamored with it and you were able to carry out your role well enough to bring the audience in, like that's good directing. That's good everything. That's good production.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I wondered, David, I listened to an interview that you had a little while back that you mentioned the importance of networking. And after, my collegiate studies, I went into business and sales, and I totally, when I heard this, like the bell went off in my head. But you mentioned that you wished that you would have been taught more about networking while you were in school. How did you end up getting better at it over time? Because I
I don't think
imagine you had some foundations, right, with the military brat moving around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever developed any sort of like good networking skills, because I never really developed how to talk to strangers a lot. It was very easy for me to talk to people in the theater department because we all had shared experience. We all knew what we were working on. But anytime I would go to someplace outside of the theater world, I was just very quiet, very soft-spoken. Didn't really ask people what was going on with them. It was very hard for me to sort of like start conversations to get to know people, and I wish that was one of the skills that was sort of offered in those type of programs, because I feel, looking back on my experience now, I do feel that I spent too much time in school, because even though I have a bachelor's and a master's in acting, and I'm not saying this to be arrogant or whatever, I didn't really learn a whole lot or anything new when I went to the master's program that I didn't know from the bachelor's program. I just got to do a lot more classical theater. I got to do a lot more Shakespeare. I got to do a lot more adult-oriented plays and stuff. But I didn't really sort of grow my skill set any more than I did during the bachelor program. And again, the way the school's system is set up, I stretched out my school career over a decade, and really that's a long time to be spent in school. And one of the reasons I did that is because, one, I took time off to go through Army basic training and be part of the National Guard, to try to get the GI Bill to help pay for school. And because the way I scheduled my classes and stuff, it took me a little bit longer to get through the programs, because I was off dancing or trying to get a girlfriend or playing D&D or whatever.
Noble pursuits, David, all, by the way, all noble.
But yeah, I mean, when I look back at it, I think, well, if I had just gone through the school program the way it's sort of like everybody else does, like, you have 4 years of college and that's it, then you're out into the real world. That probably would have changed a lot for me, and we probably wouldn't be talking today, because if I'd gone out to Los Angeles earlier, I probably would have failed earlier and walked away from that and got into something else and whatever, and not been there at the moment when I was lucky enough to be selected to be a part of that kids television show that we haven't gotten to yet.
Well, hey, we're on its doorstep
Exactly.
because you
Yeah,
know
but even in the graduate program, in the master's program, there really wasn't a class about how to survive between jobs, because what we were taught was this is how you get the role. They taught us all about the auditioning process. They taught us all about what to prepare for, how to cut a monologue and make sure you do these things and that kind of thing. And they taught you how to do the job. This is what you need to do, in order to create a character, to be on stage, to show up on time, to make sure that you know your cues, and this is how you walk, this is how you talk. All those basics. But we were never taught, what it was like between jobs. We knew how to look for the job, we knew how to get the job, we knew how to perform the job once we got it. But what do you do in between? We weren't like given any sort of clues about these are the kind of jobs that will help you. So you could work during the day and audition at night and do plays at night or whatever. And these are the sort of tax problems that you might run into, or these are the tax loopholes that might help save you money. That you can claim these on your taxes. All these different things that would sort of the survival skills of an actor out in the wild. We really weren't given anything like that. At least not in my experience. I mean, I don't know about other programs, if Juilliard or if the Actors Studio or anything like that really delves into the nitty gritty about this is what you need to do to pound the pavement to. I was never taught how to talk to people, to network. I was never told about all of the rules that need to be in place, and because especially in Hollywood, or I don't know if it's the same in New York, because I was never really interested in going to New York, but the big lesson that I learned was that you should be nice to everybody, just be kind to everybody, because you don't know who you're going to meet on the way up, and those people that you meet on the way up are the same people you're going to meet on the way down, and they'll remember you, not because of what you did, not because of how good you were in this part. They'll remember you because you were the guy that got him a coffee, or you were the guy that paid him a compliment, or you held the door for them at one time, or you said something nice about their, how they were dressed or whatever. That was a skill that I learned or developed really, really late. And I wish I had learned that much earlier on, about, getting my head and my nose out of the script and the text and paying more attention to what was happening on the set around me, or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I wish I had less time at school and more time learning how to network. Yeah.
Well, the networking opportunities when you showed up to audition, for, if you want to call him Zoltar as he originally was called, or Zordon. Now, your original audition here, there was only two people, you, yourself, and one other person, right? That were trying out for the role.
In my memory of it, yeah. I don't know if they had seen anybody else during the day before I got there, but when I showed up, because my friend from school, this is like my one example of how networking helps. I mean, I had gone to school with Stacy Fish in Texas. I had known Stacy for years, and she was actually working at Saban at the time on some of their direct to video movies and stuff. And she was working on the pilot that they were shooting for the show called Dino Rangers. And she said, "Hey, we're having auditions for the character, and I think you'd be really good for it. You want to come down?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I'm here for." So yeah, and it was just me and another guy.
Well, I mean, speaking of, like, we talked about how those Dino Rangers obviously is not what the show ended up being called. It gets the very iconic Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and an amazing theme song that just gets everyone going as soon as you hear it. And then from there, like, the show just steamrolls the audience. It's fantastic. So do you know why they didn't keep, like, the original Dino Rangers theme, or not theme, like the Dino Rangers show, and they actually ended up scrapping the first pilot and going with the second?
Well, I don't know if you guys have seen the original pilot that they I think they aired it on some special or something like that.
Mhm.
When you see the actors that played the Rangers, when they transform, Zach would transform into a mastodon and just looked
Mhm.
weird. And
Yeah.
um, and the original Zoltar character was like this blob of green jelly. You couldn't even recognize who it was or whatever. I guess it didn't test well.
Mhm.
And uh, I don't know why they didn't keep the Dino Ranger name. I know they changed the original name of Zoltar because that was the name of the fortune teller machine from the movie Big. And
Yeah.
oh,
Mhm.
we don't want to have anything to do with that. So, and I guess it just made natural sense for them to call him Zordon because they had the Zords and all that kind of.
Mhm.
Um, but I was very glad that they did clean up the footage because you could actually see my face.
Yeah.
I think they missed the beat because instead of the beasts of old, they should have just gone with werewolves. Because I think you would have bought in,
Mhm.
maybe even tried out for a
Well, I
different role at
mean,
that point.
it was one of those things where, like, that those 10 years of schooling really paid off for me because I was more than prepared to play that part because
Mhm.
of training. And that's the sort of thing that you always look for when you're auditioning for a job is, you're the right person in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
And that's really sort of how I look at that casting because in my experience, it was unusual for the fact that it wasn't a cattle call where I would go into a casting agent's office, sit in a line with a bunch of other people, go in, read a bunch of lines to a video camera, and then go home and never hear anything. Here, I was brought down to the actual Saban building, taken up to the fourth floor, sat in a
Mhm.
in a conference room, and given the lines and told, you're a 10,000-year-old wizard, you're trapped in a time warp, go. And the basic premise of because I don't know if they had told me or if I had asked a question, and they said, well, we're taking some shows, it's a Japanese Sentai show, and we're going to mix in some American footage. And I was like, oh, so it's kind of like Ultraman. And like, yeah, it's very much like Ultraman. Okay, I get it. So I knew exactly what the show was going to be about, and I had watched Ultraman growing up. I had seen Spectre Man and um, Marine Boy and Speed Racer. So I was very aware, and of course, Battle for the Planets
Mhm.
or Gotcha Man, and so I was very aware of this sort of tradition of America taking these shows from a foreign country and dubbing them and turning it into something new. So I was like,
Mhm.
I understand completely what that is. Yeah, I also was aware enough to be able to kind of spy on what the other gentleman was rehearsing for his take on the character and thinking, oh no, that's completely wrong. he was going for
Mhm.
a much more of a vulture type character. He's like, Power Rangers. And
Oh.
Oh, no, that would not have worked at all.
yeah, because, we were told it was sort of like this
Mhm.
kind of thing. So I think he went with that direction of it. And
Mhm.
here I was thinking, oh no, this character has to be much larger than that. It needs to
Mhm.
be a presence to reckon with. And in my mind, I was thinking, this is Zeus on Mount Olympus talking to Perseus and telling him what needs to be done to save the world and stuff. So
Mhm.
I went for a very deeper, much more deity-like presence,
Mhm.
and I guess that's what got me the part. So
Yeah, well, like you said, your skills definitely got you the audition, that got you the part, but Zordon is when you look at, like, the cavalcade of Power Rangers leaders, Zordon is, like, iconic, he's endearing, he's the one that basically, at least, the United States, everyone remembers more than everyone. Everyone's compared to Zordon.
yeah.
So, what's something that you think that maybe you did that made Zordon him, that if anyone else would have played him, he wouldn't have been the same character?
I think even though I had this deep, commanding voice, I think there is a great deal of empathy that Zordon has. Um, this uh, this very deep caring about the kids who are taking on this mantle of danger.
Mhm.
In recent times, there have been takes about Power Rangers where it's like, how evil was Zordon to put these kids into danger and to make them sort of child soldiers to fight a war that wasn't there to begin with, and that sort of thing. But back in the 90s, and when we were doing it, it was so obvious that that wasn't the case. It was just this cheesy G-rated living cartoon show. But I think one of the reasons why Zordon has endured is that, unlike other mentor characters for other superhero teams, I was super excited when the show was on the air because it was in this power hour of Power Rangers and X-Men, the animated cartoon. And I was like, I'm like the Professor X of Power Rangers. But I mean, when you look at other superhero teams akin to Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever, the mentor character at some point in those shows jumps into the fight with the heroes, helps them out physically or in some way, rescues them or something like that. Zordon never did that. Zordon was this disembodied head who the only tool in his toolbox that he could use was this supportive parental, I believe in you philosophy that you can do this. I know you can do this. You're here for a reason. I believe in you. And I think that's an incredibly powerful lesson for kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old watching the show and hearing somebody tell them, I believe in you. You can do this. And I think that's the greatest element of the character that I can think of that subconsciously or consciously has put him always sort of like in the top 3 of who people's favorite Power Rangers mentors are or whatever.
Yeah, he reminds me of like a JRPG mentor that he makes sure that you get the things that you need, as they come up, right? It's not so much like over leveling and making sure you can just wipe out everything at once. It's like, nope, you're meeting this challenge. We're gonna get you this thing now, and the classic on the job training, right? But tell you what, we've got another fan question for you that on the topic of Zordon. Now, you've mentioned that Zordon's mouth didn't sink because it was a cost savings method for the studio. If money weren't a concern, what else do you wish producers could have done for Zordon?
It would have been nice to see Zordon outside of the tube, whether in a flashback or from an actor's standpoint, it would have been nice to have something else to do on the show rather than show up every 5 or 6 weeks to do voice lines. But I mean, the way the show was structured, I when I look back on it, I really think that the guys, and I could be completely wrong about this. This is just my supposition about the whole thing, is that it was really easy for them to write themselves into a corner, and, because when I did the role, there was no backstory for Zordon. There was no discussion about what the morphing grid was. Why was he no longer on Eltar? How did he get, to be this wise? How did he get to be, involved in this sort of conflict with Rita and all this other kind of stuff? It was all very basic, something that a 5 or 6 year old be like, I understand. Yeah, that's good. Go. And it is that sort of silly thing about, Zordon had all of these tools in his toolbox that he only pulled out at the right time. Oh, well, here, let me give you a new Zord because that other one was, didn't work out for that problem or whatever. It's like, you couldn't have given that, right from the beginning. Why do you have to keep hiding these things from us or whatever? But
because this one's stick shift, okay? The other ones, those are automatic. All right.
Yeah. Which is why, when I look at what Kyle Higgins and Ryan Parrott have done with Power Rangers in the Boom Studio comics, I'm like, that is awesome because we get to understand the reasoning why, all this is happening, the backstory and stuff. And, this makes sense now. And they really weren't operating on that because I know from an actor's standpoint, we didn't think it was going to last more than a season, 2 seasons, because that was the tradition for Saturday morning cartoons. You would have 1 year of it, and then it would get replaced by whatever was new the next year. But I think the guys in the business office and Haim Saban knew that we could drag this out for 5 or 6 years because we have all this merchandise. Because the show really was basically to sell toys. That's what it was all about.
Oh yeah.
But Yeah, so they really weren't paying a whole lot of attention to, continuity and storyline and
Mhm.
what this character was going to do and what we thought they should do and that sort of thing. Um, and it's very interesting to see that in the 95 movie, they bring Zordon outside of the tube, and then he almost perishes or whatever. And then it turns out that movie isn't really canon to the series, and
Yeah.
they do the Ninjetti sequence all over again on the TV series. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, I don't think that they had this sort of Kevin Feige Marvel timeline of we're going to start here with this and end up over here with this,
Mhm.
and all of this stuff is going to tie in together. They were just like, we need an episode about a purse monster, and then they would go mash all
Mm.
that together. So yeah, I mean,
Well,
from a production standpoint, it was very
mhm.
smart of them to do things the way they did because it was quick and easy and boom.
Mhm.
From an actor standpoint, it really sucked.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what makes sense. Like, they made the show for a pretty young audience. Like I said, what the target audience was, what, between, like, what, 6 and 10? Like, it was a window that you were making it for, and like you said, Saturday mornings had a tradition of, like, a year and the show's done. And even, like, the Sentai series, that's tradition there too. It gets a season, and then they're done, and they have something new. So, Mighty Morphin was more or less this amazing attempt at taking everything was formulated except for it to be temporary, but they were able to stretch it and make it into something that
Mhm.
worked for as long as it possibly could.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. And now, like, I love that you brought up Boom Studios, because this is where, like, again, like, initially it was just meant to entertain a younger audience. But now that audience is growing up, they still love, like, all the visuals about the property. They love the characters that are the property, and they're able to flesh out more of this coherent backstory
Yeah.
that wasn't necessarily in mind when they made the original series. So, getting close to the end of the podcast here, we want to look at more, again, more onto you, and look at more of your writing, because you
Mhm.
brought it up a little bit when you had talked about your link with Lincoln Bright, and kind of your idea of how the character is able to solve issues through his world. So, transitioning to that now, I feel like when you're starting to write something brand new, that is incredibly difficult. So, how do you actually begin your writing process? Do you start with an issue that you like to solve and then think of characters around it, or how do you get the ball rolling?
I think too much. Um, there's always something that kind of sticks in my brain, and I
Mhm.
worry it like an oyster worries a grain of sand until it turns into something that might be valuable. Like 5 years ago, I had come up with the idea for a story called Blacktop Jacker, which is about uh, sort of the collapse of the United States, and which all starts with the proliferation or the rise of smart trucks, these self-driving vehicles that can deliver goods across the nation without somebody at the wheel. And how would that transform the landscape and the economy of the United States if all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of people are now out of a job because self-driving trucks don't have to stop at a strip mall or a gassing plaza to buy lunch or dinner or toothpaste. They don't have to stop for showers or sleep or any of those things. So all of these businesses that line the highways of the nation, will they go belly up if there are nobody visiting them? What does that do for the economic collapse of the United States? And then, given the current political climate, who capitalizes on that? Does Texas secede from the union, and what happens when that goes on? And these truckers who are now out of a job start doing what they did in the old west, where they start hijacking the trucks that they used to drive and jacking them and stealing the goods so that they can give to the poor people that aren't getting the goods that they need. And um, so that kind of snowballs in my brain into, like, 500,000 words of a story.
Sure.
And pretty much, the same thing happened with Lincoln Bright, because I was dealing with unrequited feeling, or not unrequited, but unresolved emotional feelings about my divorce. And I was thinking, okay, well, how do how do I therapize myself out of that? And one thing, and I was also trying to think in a very sort of business-like way about how can I tell a ghost story, which is about things that are unresolved, things that get left behind that you worry to death. But how can I make that different? And because I didn't want to use the word ghost.
Sure.
I didn't want to use something that so many people had written stories about. I wanted something to be different because that way, everybody needs a hook. Everybody needs a something that makes it stand out. And that's where I came up with the idea of glims, and how certain things that get left behind, again, will ripple out and still continue to do harm long after the inciting incident is over with.
Mhm.
And then that transformed into like this really awesome world where there's a cult of apocalyptic magicians who are trying to create as many of these things as possible because they want to cleanse the world of evil and all that kind of thing. So those are the kind of things that they start off as one thing, but then they snowball down the hill into something. It's just like
Mhm. So was then like you brought up Glims, was it always meant to be 3 books, or was that kind of like a snowball effect? You got writing like, you know what? I think this has to go to another book.
the original incarnation of Lincoln Bright actually was a story called The Springs, where Lincoln was going to be he was going to inherit a hotel, much like the Overlook from The Shining, where
Mhm.
his uncle or somebody had passed away, and he was willed this giant hotel that he now then had to run and take care of. And the idea at that point was that every room in that hotel was haunted, and there would be every Lincoln Bright story would be about a different room in the hotel. And I thought, well, that's kind of a neat little 20 book series. I could do that. Not a big deal.
Mhm.
But then I started to think about it, and I was like, well, I don't think I want to write Lincoln the way that James Bond is written, or the way
Mhm.
that the Executioner novels were written, where there's like 27 of them, and it's like, how many times can this guy, shoot his way out of a terrorist situation or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
so and then it just became much more compact, and so the Lincoln Bright series will end after 4 books. Yeah.
Well, I know, one of the things your IMDb page shows is that, your project called The Order is now entered post-production. What can you tell us about The Order?
Well, I mean, the order is sort of in a holding pattern right now. Karen is really doing a lot of the groundwork for that because she's out in Los Angeles. She's been knocking on so many doors. She's been having so many meetings with people to try to sell this idea, because we had originally had done it because Karen has been part of the convention circuit for, gosh, 10 years or more, 12 years,
Mhm.
something like that. And, through all these times of being going to conventions and meeting fans and stuff, they were always asking, when are you guys going to work together again? When are we going to see the old gang back together again? And there was always something where either the script didn't work out, or this person didn't want to be a part of the project, and whatever. But instead of waiting for Saban or whoever owned the Power Rangers would try to bring everybody back together, Karen was like, screw it, we're going to do it ourselves. She found out that I was a writer, and we started talking, emailing back and forth. And then we found out very quickly that Karen and I had a very compatible, easy writing relationship, where I would send her something and she would go like, this is fantastic. And then she would add something and I would send it back and go, oh, this is fantastic too. And, at the end of a month and a half, we had our script, and we were like, holy crap, this is pretty good. And we were very scared about showing it to anybody else, because we didn't want them to think, oh, this is another project that's going to be, wacky or whatever. But we were very lucky in the fact that the people that, we had invited to be a part of it, they all read the script and thought, this is fantastic. This is awesome. And we had done the Indiegogo for it. And then, unfortunately, the union stepped in and put the kibosh on it. So it was shut down 4 days before we were ready to film.
Ooh.
All of us were there. We all had the costumes lined up. We had the set pieces lined up. We had all the equipment ready to go. And then it was just shut down. And Karen was in tears. But she's been trying to keep it alive. She's been trying to shop it around and make it into possibly a series that might air on some streaming network or whatever. So that's where it's at this point in time. It's out there. It's got this wonderful pitch deck that anybody who looks at it would be like, this is freaking amazing. But for whatever reason, it isn't being tapped to say, okay, let's do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just goes to show just how, difficult it is to make it in that industry where you can have an amazing idea, you can have an amazing cast lined up, and then it doesn't get picked up, or a union steps in and says, no, it's not happening.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, as we kind of draw things to a close here, again, we'd like to thank you very much for your time this evening and coming in and talking with us, answering our fan questions. And what we like to do with the last bit of our shows when we have guests is kind of just give them the floor for the last few minutes, where you can talk about any projects you're passionate about, anything you've got on your horizon, or anything that you're still hoping to accomplish. So the floor is yours. Where can we find you? And what's next for David J. Fielding?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at David J. Fielding, or you can find me on Instagram at DJFielding_Zordon. Those are my two main social media contact places now. I'm currently finishing up edits for book 3 of the Lincoln Bright series, and preparing and researching and making sure that I have all of my ducks in a row to finish book 4. And then I'm also sort of like noodling around about what will be the next story after that. That's basically all that's been going on. I've been trying to. The world is on fire. There's so much going on that we should be concerned about, and so many things that are. I don't want to say more important than what we're talking about here, but in a way they kind of are. And let's all hope that things work out for the best, that we don't get drawn into a worldwide conflict, which would suck for everybody. And just it's really kind of cheesy to think that a character that I played one day 30 years ago, again, very much like the stories I read growing up, the movies and TV shows that all of us watched growing up, that had these sort of life lessons that tell you, just don't be a dick, to be the better person, to be the bigger person. And yet we find ourselves in situations where those lessons that we try to teach ourselves over and over are not being paid attention by the people that we allow to run things. And I really wish that the phrase, may the power protect you, really come true a lot more than it does. And so in my short little soapbox here, it's like, just be kind, take your time to empathize with people, because the more empathy we put out there, maybe some of this darkness that we feel crowding in on us will be pushed back a little bit. So let's try to do more of that.
Well,
That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. And you know what? I know, like, you can always hope that your reach can go as far as it can, but at least from this end of the table, I have to say that, what you did and what you do does have an impact, because it definitely had an impact on me and who I grew up to be because of watching Power Rangers, from me reading other science fiction books and the characters that I invested so much of my time and energy into. So what you did make a difference for so many, and we can only hope that more will learn from what you've tried teaching us.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm pumping the chest for you right now, David. Seriously, you've been amazing. You survived the digital dissection. An hour goes quick, and we really do appreciate and look forward to your next upcoming projects here. So it's been a great time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.